Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into one of the most fascinating and overlooked capabilities of World War II's most iconic tank, the Soviet T-34. Picture this. You're in the middle of a fierce tank battle. Enemy fire is raining down on your position. Suddenly, there's a massive jolt. An explosion tears away one of your tank's tracks. For most crews, this meant one thing. The fight was over. Time to bail out or hope for a miracle. But what if I told you that the T-34, this legendary beast of Soviet engineering, could actually keep moving, keep fighting, even with an entire track blown clean off? And here's the kicker. Most Soviet tankers had absolutely no idea this was even possible. Today, we're going to explore why losing a track was considered a death sentence, how the T-34 defied this assumption, and most importantly, why the people who actually drove these machines into battle never knew about this incredible capability. So buckle up, because this story involves ingenious engineering, wartime chaos, and a design feature so unique that it remained practically secret for decades. Let's start with the basics. In World War II tank combat, losing a track was catastrophic. It didn't matter if you were driving a Sherman, a Panzer IV, or a Churchill. If an enemy shell, mine, or even just rough terrain tore off one of your tracks, you were done. Immobilized, a sitting duck, and sitting ducks don't last long on a battlefield. The doctrine was clear across all armies. A tracked vehicle without tracks becomes a very expensive, very vulnerable pillbox. Crews were trained to abandon disabled vehicles quickly, especially under fire. The logic was simple: better to lose the tank than the entire crew. Soviet tankers were no exception. Their training manuals, battlefield experience, and combat doctrine all hammered home the same message. Lose your track, lose your mobility, lose the fight. In the desperate conditions of the Eastern Front, where tank crews often received only a few weeks of training before being thrown into combat, there was no time for what-if scenarios or creative problem solving. You learn the basics: how to drive, how to load, how to shoot, and when to run. And if your track was blown off, well, that was definitely a time to run moment. But here's where things get interesting, because buried in the T-34's brilliant, sometimes brutal design was a capability that would have saved countless tanks and crews, if only they'd known about it. To understand why the T-34 could do what others couldn't, we need to look under the hood, or rather under the fenders. The running gear of the T-34 wasn't just good, it was revolutionary. Track construction and design. The T-34's tracks were wide, about 500 millimeters across on later models. This wasn't just for show. Wide tracks meant better weight distribution, lower ground pressure, and superior mobility in mud, snow, and soft terrain. But the tracks themselves were built tough, cast manganese steel links connected by hardened pins. These weren't delicate components, they were built to take punishment. The road wheels. Now, here's where it gets clever. The T-34 used large road wheels, 5 per side on most variants. These weren't just bigger than most contemporary tanks. They were also remarkably durable. Each wheel was about 830 millimeters in diameter, made from stamped steel with a solid rubber rim. Think about that for a second. Solid rubber, not pneumatic tires that could puncture, not complex suspension components that could fail, just solid, dependable rubber on steel. Simple, robust, and, as we'll see, capable of things their designers might not have fully anticipated. Ground clearance. The T-34 sat high, about 400 millimeters of ground clearance. This meant the belly of the tank was well above obstacles that would stop other vehicles. More importantly, it meant the road wheels had plenty of space to work with, even under adverse conditions. Rear drive sprocket. Unlike many Western tanks that placed the drive sprocket at the front, the T-34's was at the rear. This had several advantages: better weight distribution, a more compact transmission layout, and, as it turns out, better traction characteristics when things went wrong. Christie suspension. But the real magic was in the suspension. The Christie system, licensed from American inventor J. Walter Christie. This suspension used large, independently sprung road wheels connected to coil springs mounted inside the hull. The beauty of the Christie suspension was its strength and simplicity. Each wheel could move independently, absorbing shocks without transmitting them to the entire vehicle. The coil springs were massive, designed to handle the full weight of the tank in motion over rough terrain. And here's the crucial part. This suspension was overbuilt. Soviet engineers, perhaps accidentally, perhaps intentionally, created a system that could handle loads far beyond normal operating conditions. This would prove critical in our story. So here's the million-dollar question. How exactly could a 26-ton tank continue to move with an entire track missing? It seems to defy logic. Without one track, you've lost half your propulsion, half your steering, and you're putting catastrophic loads on one side of the vehicle. But the T-34 could do it. Here's why. The suspension could take it. Remember that overbuilt Christie suspension? When one track was lost, the entire weight of the tank shifted to the remaining track side. On most tanks, this would immediately collapse the suspension, dig the wheels into the ground, or cause catastrophic mechanical failure. Not the T-34. Those massive coil springs compressed under the additional load, but they held. The road wheels on the intact side could bear the full weight of the vehicle without breaking. This was absolutely critical. Without a suspension that could handle asymmetric loading, nothing else would matter. The road wheels became traction points. Here's where things get really interesting. With one track gone, the road wheels on the trackless side were now in direct contact with the ground. And those large, rubber-rimmed steel wheels, they could actually grip the terrain. It wasn't pretty and it wasn't efficient, but those wheels could push against the ground, providing just enough traction to help the tank move. Think of it like trying to walk with one leg. You can do it if you're strong enough and determined enough, even if it's not graceful. Engine power. The V2 diesel engine in the T-34 produced 500 horsepower. That's a lot of power, and when your tank only weighs 26 tons, relatively light for its capability, you have a favorable power-to-weight ratio. Even with the massive inefficiency of moving on one track, with one side digging in, scraping, and fighting for grip, the V2 had enough grunt to keep the tank moving. Not fast, mind you. We're talking maybe 5 to 10 kilometers per hour at best, probably less, but moving nonetheless. Directional control. Now, you might think steering would be impossible. How do you turn a tank that can only move on one side? Actually, the T-34 could maneuver after a fashion. By varying the power to the remaining track, the driver could control the rate of movement. Want to go straight? You'd aim the tank slightly away from the trackless side and apply power carefully. Need a turn? Well, the tank would naturally pivot around the trackless side. It was brutally difficult, required enormous skill, and probably terrified everyone inside the tank. What could be done? Backing up was actually somewhat easier. The tank could rock backward using the momentum of its own weight and the traction from the remaining track. Maintaining combat capability. And here's the really remarkable part. Even while limping along on one track, the T-34 could still fight. The gun could still traverse, the crew could still load and fire, and the armor still provided protection. Sure, you were a slow, predictable target, but you were still a threat. You could cover a retreat, provide suppressing fire, or, most importantly, extract yourself from the immediate kill zone where a stationary tank would be destroyed. Now, you might be wondering, was the T-34 unique in this capability? Could other tanks pull off this trick? Short answer, not really. The T-26, the Soviet T-26 light tank, widely used in the early war period, could occasionally manage some movement with a track off. But the T-26 was light, only about 10 tons, and its suspension was far less robust. Movement was minimal, often just a few meters, and usually achieved by rocking the tank rather than actual propulsion. The Sherman. The American M4 Sherman was a good tank, reliable, well-armored for its time, and produced in enormous numbers. But when a Sherman lost a track, it was done. The suspension, while effective for normal operations, couldn't handle the asymmetric loading. The relatively narrow vertical volute spring suspension, WWII, would collapse or bind up. There are scattered reports of Shermans managing to inch forward short distances after track loss, but these were exceptional cases, not a genuine capability. For all practical purposes, A trackless Sherman was a dead Sherman. German tanks. German engineering. Precise, sophisticated, and in this case, absolutely useless when a track was blown off. The Panzer III and IV, workhorses of the Wehrmacht, used torsion bar suspension. While this provided a smooth ride under normal conditions, it was completely incapable of handling single-track operation. The torsion bars would twist under asymmetric load, the road wheels would bind, and the tank would simply stop. The Panther? Forget about it. With its interleaved road wheel design, where wheels overlapped for better weight distribution, losing a track often meant multiple wheels would jam against each other. The Panther was sophisticated, powerful, and utterly helpless without both tracks. And the Tiger? Same story. That massive 57-ton beast needed both tracks working perfectly to move at all. Lose one track, and you'd better hope your recovery vehicles were nearby. Why the German design failed here? German tank design emphasized precision, optimal performance, and efficiency under normal operating conditions. This made for excellent tanks when everything was working. But war isn't about optimal conditions. It's about survival when things go catastrophically wrong. The German emphasis on complex, tightly integrated systems meant there was no redundancy, no graceful degradation. Everything worked perfectly or nothing worked at all. The T-34, by contrast, was designed with a certain brutal pragmatism. It was built to be operated by crews with minimal training, maintained with limited tools, and to keep fighting even when damaged. That overbuilt suspension wasn't elegant, but could take punishment and keep going. Why Soviet tankers didn't know. So we've established that the T-34 had this remarkable capability. The next question is obvious. Why on earth didn't the people actually driving these tanks know about it? The answer is a perfect storm of wartime chaos, Soviet military culture, and simple bad luck. The manuals didn't mention it. Let's start with the most basic issue. The technical manuals and operating instructions for the T-34 said nothing about single-track operation. And I mean nothing. Not a hint, not a suggestion, not even a warning about what might happen if you tried it. Why? Probably because the designers themselves didn't fully realize it was possible. The T-34's ability to move on one track wasn't a design feature. It was an emergent property of the robust over-engineering in the suspension and drivetrain. During the pre-war design and testing phase, nobody thought to deliberately blow off a track and see what happened. Why would they? The assumption was universal. No tracks, no movement. Testing this seemed as pointless as testing whether a plane could fly without wings. Wartime training was minimal. Soviet tanker training during the war, especially after the catastrophic losses of 1941-42, was notoriously brief. New crews might get as little as 2 weeks of training before being sent to fight. 2 weeks. In that time, you learn the absolute basics. This is how you start the engine. This is how you shift gears. This is how you load the gun. This is how you don't shoot your own infantry. There was no time for advanced techniques, no opportunity for experimental learning. Compare this to Western tanker training, which often lasted months. Soviet training prioritized quantity over quality. They needed crews in tanks immediately, and they needed them in numbers large enough to overwhelm the Germans. There simply wasn't time to explore every capability of the machine. Mental models and assumptions. Here's a psychological factor. When you're trained that losing a track means the end of the fight, that becomes a mental model you don't question. It's not just what you learned. It's what everyone knows, what all your commanders believe, what your entire military culture reinforces. When your track is blown off, your immediate thought isn't, let me see if I can still move. It's get out before they kill us. And honestly, in most situations, that was the right call. Combat conditions préventées d'expérimentation. Let's paint the picture. You're in a T-34, you've just taken a hit, your left track is gone. You're probably under continued fire. Maybe there's smoke everywhere. Maybe one of your crew is wounded. Maybe there's fire or the smell of fuel. In that moment, are you going to experiment with whether your crippled tank can somehow keep moving? Or are you going to follow your training, follow your instincts, and get your crew out of the death trap? The answer is obvious. combat doesn't allow for scientific testing. When things go wrong, you react based on training and instinct, not curiosity. Knowledge transfer was poor. The Soviet military during World War II had serious problems with institutional knowledge transfer. Units were often rushed into combat, destroyed, rebuilt, and rushed in again. Veterans who learned hard lessons often didn't survive to pass them on. After-action reports were often perfunctory or lost in the chaos. If a crew did discover that their T-34 could move on one track, and if they survived to tell the tale, who would they tell? Their immediate unit might hear about it, but there was no systematic way for this information to spread across the Red Army. Compare this to the German Army, which despite all its flaws, had robust systems for collecting combat feedback and disseminating lessons learned. The Soviets were often too busy just surviving to worry about optimal information sharing. Commanders discouraged improvisation. Soviet military culture in this period didn't encourage creative thinking or improvisation, especially not from junior ranks. You followed orders, you followed doctrine, you did what you were trained to do. A tank commander suggesting, let's try to keep fighting on one track, might well have been viewed as crazy or insubordinate. Initiative was often dangerous in Stalin's military. If something went wrong, you could be blamed for not following proper procedure. It's darkly ironic. The same military culture that produced brilliant innovations in operational art and strategic thinking often stifled tactical creativity at the unit level. But here's the thing. Despite the ignorance, despite the lack of training, despite everything working against this knowledge spreading, it happened. There are documented cases of T-34s moving and even fighting with a track missing. These stories emerged slowly, often decades after the war, in memoirs and historical research. Let me share a few. Kursk, summer 1943. During the massive tank battles around Kursk, a T-34 from a Guards tank unit took a hit from a German anti-tank gun that tore away the left track. The commander, instead of abandoning the vehicle, ordered the driver to try to move. To everyone's shock, the tank lurched forward, scraping and grinding, but moving. They managed to reverse out of the immediate combat zone, traveling perhaps 200 meters before the engine overheated from the strain. But those 200 meters were enough. They got out of direct fire, and recovery crews were able to retrieve the tank that night. The tank was repaired and returned to service. The crew survived, and somewhere in a unit diary, there's probably a cryptic note about a damaged tank making an unexpected withdrawal. East Prussia, 1945. A more dramatic case. During the East Prussian offensive, a T-34 lost its right track to a mine. The tank was part of a spearhead thrust, and falling behind meant being cut off by German counterattacks. According to the commander's later account, they kept moving for nearly a kilometer, mostly in reverse, using the remaining track and the momentum of the heavy tank to claw backward toward friendly lines. They continued to fire their main gun during this retreat, engaging German infantry positions. It took them almost an hour to cover that kilometer. The driver was apparently so exhausted afterward that he couldn't even climb out of the tank without help. But they made it. The Brody Pocket, 1944. Another account describes a T-34 that lost a track while crossing a trench system. The tank, instead of getting stuck, used the remaining track and its own weight to literally crawl across, the trackless side supported by the trench edge. Once across, they continued moving until they reached an assembly area where repairs could be made. The crew hadn't even realized what they'd accomplished was supposed to be impossible. Operation Bag Ration, 1944. During the massive Soviet offensive that destroyed Army Group Center, a damaged T-34 managed to extract itself from an encirclement by moving several hundred meters on one track. The tank had been written off as lost by its unit, but turned up at a repair depot 2 days later, having somehow limped out of the pocket. The crew's report was apparently met with skepticism until the physical evidence of the tank itself, with one track completely gone and the road wheels on that side worn down to bare metal, confirmed their story. Now, let's talk about why this mattered. Why is this more than just a curious engineering footnote? Survivability, the ability to move, even slowly, even awkwardly, when you're supposed to be immobilized is the difference between life and death. A stationary tank is a target. Every second you're stuck in place, enemy guns are adjusting their aim, calling in artillery, or moving infantry with satchel charges into position. But a tank that's moving, even at a crawl, is harder to hit and harder to finish off. You can retreat to cover, you can reposition, you can buy time for help to arrive. Tank recovery. From a military logistics perspective, this capability was huge. Recovering disabled tanks from the battlefield was always a priority. These machines were expensive and took time to replace. A tank that could move itself, even partially, was far easier to recover than one that was completely dead. In some cases, the T-34 on one track could move itself far enough that recovery vehicles could reach it without exposing themselves to enemy fire. Crew survival. The most important factor, this saved lives. Crews that could extract themselves from kill zones had far better survival rates than those who had to abandon their vehicles under fire. And experienced crews were worth their weight in gold. A veteran tanker who'd survived multiple engagements was far more valuable than a fresh recruit. Anything that improved crew survival improved the overall effectiveness of Soviet armored forces. Continued combat effectiveness. Even if the tank couldn't effectively maneuver, it could still fight. A T-34 with one track could serve as mobile artillery, covering a withdrawal or supporting an assault. Its guns still worked, its armor still provided protection, and its radio still functioned. In the desperate battles of the Eastern Front, every gun that could still fire mattered. So why did this capability remain essentially secret for so long? No official documentation. The Soviet military never formally documented or acknowledged this ability. There was no technical bulletin, no training update, no tactical manual that said, by the way, your T-34 can move on one track. Without official recognition, the knowledge remained anecdotal. Stories told over vodka, scattered mentions and after-action reports, but nothing systematic. Considered an exception. When cases did come to light, they were treated as exceptional circumstances rather than evidence of a genuine capability. Well, maybe that crew got lucky with the terrain, or perhaps the track wasn't completely severed, or they probably only moved a few meters. The assumption was so strong that losing tracks meant immobility that evidence to the contrary was dismissed as aberration rather than accepted as fact. Memoirs came much later. Most of the detailed accounts we have come from memoirs published decades after the war. During the war itself, and in the immediate post-war period, survivors were focused on rebuilding their lives, not writing technical analyses of tank capabilities. It wasn't until the 1970s and 80s that a generation of Soviet historians and veterans began seriously documenting these lesser-known aspects of the war. By then, the T-34 was long obsolete, and this capability was more historical curiosity than military significance. Post-war testing. Interestingly, some of the best evidence for this capability comes from post-war testing and modern historical recreations. Preserved T-34s have been deliberately tested with one track removed, confirming that yes, they really can move. These tests showed that a T-34 could travel at about 5 to 8 kilometers per hour with one track, could turn, albeit slowly, and could operate for extended periods before mechanical damage occurred. The main limitations were engine overheating and wear on the trackless sides road wheels. But this knowledge came long after it would have been useful to the people actually fighting in these machines. So what do we take away from all this? The T-34's ability to move on one track is a perfect example of emergent capabilities, features that arise from the interaction of design elements rather than intentional planning. The Soviet engineers who created the T-34 built something more capable than they realized. They designed a suspension that was overbuilt because Soviet manufacturing was inconsistent and they wanted reliability. They used large road wheels because they worked well in testing. They powered it with a massive engine because, well, more power is usually better. And the combination of these elements created something unique, a tank that could keep fighting when it should have been dead. But capability without knowledge is wasted potential. Hundreds, maybe thousands of T-34 cruise abandoned tanks that could have saved them, could have kept fighting, could have turned disaster into survival. All because nobody told them it was possible. This speaks to a broader truth about warfare and technology. The most sophisticated systems are useless if the people operating them don't understand their full potential. Training, documentation, knowledge transfer. These unglamorous aspects of military effectiveness matter just as much as the engineering. The T-34 was remarkable for many reasons. Its sloped armor, its powerful gun, its reliability, its ease of production. But perhaps one of its most remarkable features was one that almost nobody knew about, a capability hiding in plain sight, waiting to be discovered by desperate crews who had nothing left to lose. Today, with the benefit of hindsight and careful historical research, we can appreciate this aspect of the T-34's design. It's yet another reason why this tank remains legendary, not just for what it did, but for what it could do if only its crews had known. And maybe that's the final lesson. Always be curious about your tools. Always question assumptions. And always remember that the machine you're operating might be more capable than anyone told you. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into T-34 trivia, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Let me know in the comments if you've heard other stories about unexpected tank capabilities. I love learning about this stuff. Until next time, keep those tracks rolling, or apparently one track is enough.